Film about nuts. It's a film about nuts. That's right, like peanuts and pecans, pistachios too. Brown nuts, Brazil nuts, and the cashew. It's nuts. That's what I said. It's a film about nuts. It's a film about trade and economics. It's a film about globalization. Nuts are grown all over the world, touching every life in every nation. Nuts. Starring Mr. Peanut, the luckiest nut in the world, and the rest of his gang. Hit it, boys! Just in case you forgot what this film is about. This is a film about nuts.
Okay, let's get started. This is a bowl of nuts.
Typically eaten as a savoury snack, nuts have a wide range of culinary uses. Nuts are grown all over the world and often travel many miles to get to your table.
And some of them have had a bumpy ride. But not me, 'cause I'm an American peanut. I was born in Georgia, in the deep south, with a silver spoon sticking out of my mouth. I sure was surprised when I realized I was the luckiest nut in the world. I traveled around all over the globe, and I was pretty shocked at what I seen. All around there were nuts, struggling to survive.
While he was living the American dream.
Our politicians tell us that trade liberalization is going to make things better. But what exactly is trade liberalization?
Liberalization is the process of becoming more liberal or free. Trade liberalization is therefore making trade more free by removing trade restrictions.
Well, I suppose in theory it sounds pretty good. We all like freedom. But from what I've seen, things aren't exactly working out as planned.
We're gonna tell you some stories that'll make it clear why these problems won't disappear.
By making trade free indiscriminately.
It's only making things worse. It's not a blessing but a curse.
And it's happening more every year. This is a groundnut.
He's a groundnut,
Groundnuts are part of the peanut family.
cousin of the peanut.
Did you know that peanuts and groundnuts aren't really nuts at all? What are they then? They're legumes.
This groundnut originated in Senegal, a country in West Africa.
Groundnuts have been grown in West Africa for centuries.
They were brought to Africa by the Portuguese in the 16th century. And later on,
Groundnuts replaced slavery as Senegal's biggest industry.
and by the time Senegal got their independence in 1960, groundnuts were their main export crop.
By specialising in the thing that a country does best and then trading for the other things it needs, it maximises its productivity.
But like many newly independent African states,
Senegal lacked the resources to invest in their development,
they needed cash.
so they got some help from the World Bank.
There's a lot that you need if you want to succeed as a viable industrial nation. You need power plants and roads, bridges, telephones, dams, drains and irrigation. If you need a little cash, we'll help you in a flash. The World Bank will come to your aid. We'll loan you some dough so that you can grow and compete in international trade.
We're satisfied as to your credit and income, and we're glad to make you the loan.
The World Bank encouraged Senegal to focus on exports, to earn the cash to repay this debt.
And Senegal's main export was groundnuts.
But then, in the 80s, something happened that no one had counted on. Because groundnuts appeared to be a lucrative and stable export crop, other developing countries began to focus on producing groundnuts as a means of earning foreign currency.
Across the globe, groundnut production is booming. From the Far East in China to the wilds of Ghana, farmers are saying goodbye to their traditional crops, hoping to get in on the ground floor of this thriving industry.
As more and more countries were producing groundnuts, more groundnuts were on the market, and so the price fell.
It's the law of supply and demand. When supply goes up without a corresponding increase in demand, the price will go down.
With the bottom falling out of the groundnut market, Senegal was getting less for their nuts.
And they had to borrow even more money just to keep their head above water. Facing bankruptcy, Senegal implemented an economic reform program with the aid of World Bank economists.
See, the World Bank doesn't just lend money, they also lend expert advisors.
Yeah, right. Experts in making sure they pay their debts.
This program followed the economic thinking of the time and called for
trade liberalization,
which begins with the removal of tariffs and duties.
So taxes on imports of foreign nuts were removed.
then privatization,
Reducing government involvement in industry.
The state-run groundnut company Sonacos, which had guaranteed prices to the farmers, was partially privatized.
and cuts in public spending.
So state programs to help farmers buy seeds, fertilizers, and tractors were all canceled. They implemented the new strategy for 10 years, but the situation only got worse.
As the price of nuts went down, the debt got out of control.
And today, Senegal is officially one of the world's most indebted nations.
They spend more on paying their debt than they do on health and education combined.
So the theory goes that you should borrow to invest and put the money in the one thing that you do best. Well, the Senegalese, they put their faith in nuts, and they ain't exactly impressed. With all the payments to meet, it's hard to stay on your feet, let alone compete with the rest. Now let's have a look at this cashew nut. He originated in Mozambique, a country in East Africa.
Cashew nuts are one of Mozambique's main exports.
That's right. And cashews are grown all over the country.
But people like this man and these two.
Cashew nuts grow from trees, suspended beneath the cashew apple. Once separated from the apple, the removal of the hard outer shell must be done with care, as the shells are highly toxic. With this achieved, the nuts can be enjoyed and have a rich, succulent flavor.
In the 1990s, there was a growing processing industry. Over 10,000 people were employed in the factories, shelling and roasting cashew nuts.
People like this man and this man and these.
Processing increases the value of the nuts and allows Mozambique to profit more from their exports.
This is what we mean by industrial development, oh yeah.
But the processing industry needs nuts to process, and too many raw nuts were being sold abroad.
Down in Mozambique, cashew nuts are leaving in the thousands, bound for parts unknown. Good luck, Mr. Cashew, and bon voyage.
But the government had a plan. To keep enough raw nuts in the country, the Mozambique government would impose a tax on the export of raw nuts.
I'm sorry, sir, but you will have to come with me.
Once processed, the nuts could leave at no charge.
Right this way, sir. Good day, sir. Right this way.
That way, more raw nuts would stay in the country.
And the factories would have enough nuts to keep them busy.
Like Senegal, Mozambique was deeply in debt, and they desperately needed some help.
What collateral can you offer for this loan?
I can offer only my record and my present salary.
I'm very sorry, but I'm afraid we can't accommodate you.
Then the IMF and the World Bank came to their aid.
They would be saved.
If you get in a sweat 'cause you can't pay your debt, things aren't working out as planned. The International Monetary Fund will come and lend a helping hand. The first thing we'll do is we'll give to you a little bit of emergency lending. We'll send our top economists who will probably insist you embrace free trade, open up your markets and cut back on public spending.
But the help would come at a price. As a condition of their loan, Mozambique would have to abandon its plan to tax raw nut exports.
The IMF's policy was based on the concept of the free market.
Their economists believed that a free trade in cashew nuts would allow the farmers to sell to the highest bidder.
And let's have the beginning bit. Thank you, sir. Thank you at the back. Yeah, lovely.
The Mozambique government disagreed with this analysis, but the IMF insisted.
They put their foot down.
Of course, Mozambique didn't have to comply, but if they didn't, they faced bankruptcy.
At first, it seemed that the IMF was right.
For a while, the price of cashews did go up.
Farmers were getting more for their nuts as foreign companies competed with local factories to buy their crops.
Yeah, the price went up, up, up.
The price went so high the local factories could no longer afford to buy them. The industry dwindled,
And one by one, the factories shut down.
By 1999, 9,000 people had lost their jobs.
Unemployment is just a fact of life. Yeah. And what I hear is it was good for the farmers, and there's over 1 million of them.
But that was only the beginning. With no competition from the local factories, the market became dominated by 2 export companies who could dictate their price.
Sold at half the going rate.
The farmers had to sell their nuts to them, whatever the offer.
And the price went down, down, down. Lower than it was before.
So, within a few years, the cashew processing industry had been destroyed. Thousands of factory workers were without jobs, and the farmers were getting less money for their raw nuts.
No, things haven't worked out well for Mozambique.
And now, after all this, the IMF has conceded that they were wrong, and is allowing Mozambique to implement their original plan. So you see what havoc the free market can wreak on a poor country like Mozambique. Free trade may be swell when you're doing well, but it ain't always great for the weak. This is a Brazil nut.
Brazil nuts only grow in the Amazon rainforest.
But unlike the name suggests, most Brazil nuts don't come from Brazil. They come from Bolivia.
3/4 of the world's Brazil nuts come from Bolivia.
Brazil nut trees can only grow under the protection of the rainforest canopy.
The specific species of bee, which pollinates the Brazil nut flower, lives in the orchids which occur naturally in the groves surrounding the Brazil nut trees. The trees will not bear fruit without these little helpers.
And because they provide an economic alternative to clear cutting and open mining,
Brazil nuts have been singled out as a good example of sustainable agriculture.
The traditional harvesting method involves waiting for the pods to fall to the ground, and then gathering them from the rainforest floor. The pods are then opened with a hatchet or similar tool, and the nuts taken to the processing plant to be deshelled.
Brazil nut harvesting encourages the Bolivian people to take advantage of the natural resources of the rainforest.
Ooh, that's conservation.
Like Mozambique, Bolivia has encouraged the development of a processing industry to get added value from their nut exports.
That's industrialization.
In the 1990s, with the help of charities and NGOs, the Brazil nut industry boomed in Bolivia.
They help them to build factories and to get their nuts to market.
In the Amazon region of Bolivia, 80% of households live in extreme poverty.
Expansion of the Brazil nut industry gave these people a significant rise in their standard of living.
They got roads, power, clean water, and medicine. Things were looking up.
However, in 1999, a change in EU health and safety regulations seemed to threaten the future of the Bolivian Brazil nut industry.
All tree nuts are susceptible to a naturally occurring fungus, which can leave traces of a carcinogen known as aflatoxin. Aflatoxins are measured in parts per billion, which is 1 particle per billion other particles.
Because of the way Brazil nuts are harvested from the rainforest floor, they often have a slightly higher level of aflatoxin compared to nuts grown on industrialized plantations.
The internationally recognized safety level for aflatoxins is 20 parts per billion.
Bolivian Brazil nuts have complied to this standard for years.
Then in 1999, the EU lowered its accepted level to 4 parts per billion.
4 parts per billion is easily achievable on industrialized plantations, but it's much more difficult in the Amazon rainforest.
'Cause you can't build a factory there.
So, although this new health and safety regulation applied to all nuts imported to the EU, it happened to hit Bolivia the hardest.
So much for sustainable agriculture.
Did you know that Europe is the biggest single market for Brazil nuts?
Yes, and they're considered to be a luxury commodity.
Europe and Bolivia are both members of the World Trade Organization.
With 137 member nations, we have no geographical affiliations. From the Sahara to the Pacific, our remit is quite specific. Through a process of complex negotiation, we encourage and promote trade liberalization. We're the final arbiter in any dispute. Our members must accept our rules as absolute. We never rest in our crusade to grease the wheels of trade. We're the World Trade Organization.
Within the WTO, countries are allowed to set their own health and safety standards for food imports, but they are expected to provide scientific evidence to back them up.
Bolivia argues that there is no scientific evidence to suggest that 4 parts per billion is any safer than 20 parts per billion. The EU claims that it is just being cautious.
Just how many Brazil nuts did you say you ate?
You know, they could just be doing this to protect their internal nut producers.
Well, that would be difficult to prove.
Whether safety precaution or trade protection, the EU's new regulation is certainly causing trouble for Bolivia.
So what can they do about it?
Bolivia has complained in WTO committees.
So far with little success.
They're planning to launch an official dispute process.
But that could take years, and meanwhile Bolivia's a mess.
So with a natural monopoly on the Brazil nut, Bolivia was onto a good thing, but one little change in EU legislation put the industry in a tough situation. If everything was equal and the playing field level, they could tell the Europeans to go to the devil. But when you need your partner more than they need you, you have to do just what they tell you to. Yes, it's time for a story about me. And what a different story it is. American peanuts are one of the most protected cash crops in the world.
Did you know that Americans spend $800 million a year on peanut butter alone? Yeah, and they've even made November Peanut Butter Lovers Month.
But peanuts haven't always held this special place in American hearts. Peanuts have been grown in the U.S. of A. since the Spanish explorers came to stay. But right up until the Civil War,
they were only thought of as food for the poor.
Well, that all changed around 1900 with the work of George Washington Carver.
His research changed the face of American farming.
He's the peanut industry's father.
George Washington Carver, and what did he do?
At the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, He was a preeminent botanist. He said,
Peanuts would make a great cash crop that could grow wherever cotton is.
The farmers listened closely to Carver's advice, and the peanut industry grew.
And it wasn't long till machines came along for planting and harvesting, shelling them too. The industry grew.
The U.S. government invested heavily in the peanut trade to set up all the equipment. And to this day, the industry is heavily subsidized. Peanut farmers get a financial bonus from the state for every ton of nuts they produce, which allows them to sell the nuts at a lower price. So it's the 21st century, and what do we find? We're the world's largest producer of the edible kind, with 50,000 peanut farms in the U.S.
Today peanuts are big business.
Adding $4 billion to the American economy, peanut farmers have nothing to fear.
'Cause the average American eats 6 pounds of peanuts every year. The other nuts we've seen are all in a mess. How did he end up being such a success?
What's so special about me? It's not like I'm the only nut to have a nutty flavor.
What's so special about him? Seems like the cards are stacked in his favor.
Unlike Senegal, we didn't need a foreign loan. We could set up our infrastructure all on our own with no debts to repay. We're doing okay with a steady demand for nuts right here at home. Unlike Mozambique, I'm protected by tariffs, and though our competitors may not like it, we got the best lawyers that money can buy, and if there's a case against us, we can fight it. And unlike Bolivia, the United States is a highly industrialized nation. So when nuts like myself arrive on the shelf, we're of the best possible specification. And if one of our trading partners makes up a policy that we're not overly keen on, the threat of sanctions usually helps to resolve any difference of opinion. So I tried my best to tell it like it is, 'cause it doesn't have to be like this. It keeps me up at night, 'cause it don't seem right, but I'm the luckiest nut in the world.